Good evening and welcome to Freedom is a Constant Struggle with your host, Key Lunyasha, and Jackie Perez is board hopping. Big thanks to Emiliano and Claude for hosting the June 1 show in my absence. It's good to be back, and I'm pleased to report that I have the help I need thanks to Ermatine Bowles, a shout out. Leroy Moore Jr. was scheduled for today's show, but he's been rescheduled and will be my guest on July 6th. This program broadcasts live on the first and third Thursdays of the month. On this June 15th, 2017, we'll be commemorating June 16th and June 19th, or Juneteenth, significant dates in South African and African American history, respectively. We'll also discuss women prisoners with my guest, Ida McCray, live in studio. Joining us by phone will be Julian Kunnie, who is the professor of, originally from South Africa, who is an activist, researcher, and professor at the University of Arizona, and he'll give us the 411 on the June 16th, commemorating the Soweto uprising in South African apartheid. Juneteenth is the oldest known celebration commemorating the ending of slavery in the U.S. Dating back to 1865, it was on June 19th that the Union soldiers landed at Galveston, Texas, with news that the war had ended and that the enslaved were now free. 2.5 years later, than President Lincoln's Emancipation Proclamation, which had become official on January 1st, 1863. Right now, we have 41 states that recognize Juneteenth as a state holiday or state holiday observance, and there are legislative efforts to make it a national holiday. This year marks the 154th anniversary of the Emancipation Proclamation. In San Francisco, the Juneteenth Festival is on Saturday, June 17th. There will be lots of live music and dozens of fun activities, including a parade that starts at 11. Check out the celebrations in your community. Ida McCray is the director of Families with a Future, a nonprofit organization that through donations provides transportation so that women prisoners can see their children. Without intervention, many children lose contact with their mothers, and many mothers lose custody of their children. Families with a Future is committed to providing that intervention. Ida McCray teaches as an adjunct professor at San Francisco City College while continuing her work with incarcerated women and facilitating their re-entry to the community upon leaving prison. A former political prisoner, Ida is a role model of achievement for the formerly incarcerated, raising a consistent, powerful voice against unjust laws and that negatively affect women and their families. Ida lived in Cuba for a number of years, witnessing what life can be like when government serves the best interests of their women and children. In 2000, Ida was named a community fellow by the California Wellness Foundation, and since that time has received numerous congressional, governmental, and grassroots recognitions and awards. Welcome, and she's also a dear friend. My
Most
good
important.
sister.
You're my comrade. I
Welcome,
love you.
Ida.
All right.
I love
Thank
you
you.
more.
I'm like, who's that they're talking about? I don't know. Ever since I've been released from prison in 1997, it's been like Sister Keela says, I've been hitting the ground running. We were in crisis then, and we're more so in a crisis now. And what I'd like to emphasize, I guess today, and thank you for inviting me, and thank you for being here, is the crisis that's surrounding women and all the people who are attached to women. First of all, we have a lot of women who are houseless. And in that, so I'm listening to a lot of things that are happening to them. My daily work is working with women in poverty and women who are in tents, sleeping behind bushes. And one of the stories I wanted to tell is that, well, you know, and the city knows about this person, but if we have an 81-year-old woman who's sleeping in bushes. And she came to where I was working during the day, and she said, you know, the rats were biting my face.
Oh.
And it's something I never even thought about.
Oh.
And I'm like, you know, it's hard out there, but you never think about the rodents that crawl in and out. You know, when I see them across the room, I'm screaming. But the thought of having them around your head and biting you and being a part of so many people. And then I talked to one of my coworkers. She said, yeah, she lives in Oakland, and where some of the spreads are there, the tents are there, you know, you see rats coming in and out. And I'm like, seeing here we are in what's the wealthiest city in the nation, if not.
San Francisco is the most expensive city in the world now.
Oh, in the world, okay.
In the world.
So, and we can't do better by, let's start at least with our women and children and our elderly. And I know we can do much better, and I really just want to put up on people to not think this is not going away. It's gotten worse since, you know, I've been home 20 years. I've been home 20 years this year.
Is
1997, since you came to see me in Dublin prison, yes, it's been 20 years, all right? And one of the things when I was in the halfway house, and I have to say this, when I was in the halfway house, they have rules that you can't go down the steps. Because I was in the halfway house in Oakland on MacArthur Boulevard, and here I am. I'm standing at the top of the steps, and I want to go and I want to help Sister Kilo, but there was this law, there was this rule there that if you step off the steps, you'll be out of bounds and you'll get a write-up. So I was just standing there like this invisible wall, and she was looking at me. I'm like, I can't because they have this rule. I can't go and I can't help you. But now,
well, I was standing there. And you know, when I got off the bus, I saw you, and I'm like, I don't understand why she's not coming toward me and not like running to me. And like,
I would have been running, but I'm running now to you.
That was weird.
So there's so many different nonsensical laws that affect prisoners, former prisoners, and people who are trying to regain their life back. You know, and you know, we talk about recycle. What about upcycling? I think, again, that people who have been incarcerated need to be a protected class. We need to be able to somehow not have to constantly disclose, well, you did this back 45 years ago, 30 years ago, 10 years ago. And I know there's a fair chance ordinance, but you know what? It's not enforced. Who's really enforcing it? And the people who are mandated to enforce it, which are attorneys, are doing a good job. But you know what? They have limitations because what? Funding. Everything's about, you know, the dollar, the funding. And
well, they can spend $75,500 per prisoner to lock somebody up, but they can't find money for housing the homeless.
And housing women. There are women who are severely damaged through the constant trauma of trying to go day by day. And, you know, we could do so much better. We need to do so much better, because if we don't try to do our best within the worlds that we can touch, you know, we have to do better. And the things that got us here, and I'm saying everybody has a generational trauma. You know, the Irish had theirs, you know, of course the Jewish people have theirs, and we have ours. And everybody has had a historical trauma based on their identity of where they come from. So in that, we need to melt and blend and work together that's helped sustain us. I know it helped sustain my mother. My mother came from the South. Yeah, she was, and in that, when they came out here, they made the West the best. And now you can't just throw people away and their descendants who have toiled and actually been poisoned, thank you, Hunters Point, DuPont, and all the people from working around here to make the West the best. So we need to see past the fingertips. You know, sometimes I tell people to hold your hands out. What do you see? Whoa, I see my fingers. I said, no. If you look past your hands, you see how what we do affects the entire world and what's happening beyond the me.
Right. Well, you know, there are, most people know by now that there are 2.2 or 3 or 4, it varies, million people locked up and that's behind the walls, and then there's another 7 million on some form of penal control, and then we have something like 3 million children with a parent with one or both parents incarcerated, and that's heavy.
And that's the collateral damage, because
yes,
if
and
you
I
have
want you to talk about what you do in terms of families with a future and connecting mothers with their children.
So what I'm doing, I'm doing a few hats, is I'm working with women who are traumatized and who are also convicted of being perpetrators of their violence, women who are considered perpetrators. And I have to say, 9 of the 10 women that I work with are actually victims. But the police have this thing of so when you come out, and they have a protocol of who gets arrested and who does not get arrested.
But let me back you up for a minute. When you say they're victims, I suspect you're saying that they were victims of abuse and were incarcerated behind being abused.
And some were not incarcerated. Some been incarcerated in their homes. Some were incarcerated by the emotional and financial and economical situations that they have to live in under what I call capitalism on steroids. So women are captured in their homes. They're captured by their immigration or documentation status. And they're being used by many people, especially...
Well, explain what you mean by captured in their homes.
Okay, when I say they're captured in their homes, it's that for example, I'll give you a good idea. I know a woman, she's undocumented, and she got into a fight with her partner. Of course, she got arrested, went to jail, got out, got the 52 weeks of batterer's intervention. And when she went back, and she had to go back because you can't afford a house here without some help unless you're making a lot of money. And most people I know are not making a lot of money. So we're talking about the average rent here, $3,200. So she had to go back. And this person is hanging over her head. Well, you got a domestic beef
She had to go
before.
back with her abuser.
Yes, because, yes. She had to go back with the abuser, and it was modified, by the judge and the courts. And a lot of times I have to say everyone is not in agreement in it, but the who has the power is who has the hammer in the hand, and that's the judge has the power. And sometimes some judges are trained, and sometimes they're not, in terms of what is the best thing for this client. So she goes back, and then, of course, what's held over her head is that I'll call the cops on you if you don't do this, that, and the other. All right? Other women who are suffering.
Because she's on a tight probation.
She's on a tight probation,
and
and
all
she
has
had
to be is seen with another
a case,
and then real simple things can violate probation.
And plus the fear of so many undocumented women, and it's just, considering that the last mayor, this was Mexico, and when it was stolen, thank you for the broken treaties, that the people...
The border is crossing us, not
right.
the other way
and
around.
then they're experiencing abuse in their homes and are afraid to report it, because guess what? When they go to the police station,
they might be deported or
they might be deported.
Or
we know what's happening to some cases of people who went to the police station to report one thing, and the next thing you know, they're being asked the question, are you documented? Are you undocumented? And by the way, I'm taking you away from your family. Well, excuse me, African Americans experience this on the auction block. And for this to be continually happen to so many undocumented people, whether it's from Haiti or from Latin America, which is a larger country than this one is, just look at a real map, it's a travesty, it's really a travesty.
And it's even worse in a way. It's so bad because the U.S. is the one who's exploiting the workers in Mexico, for example. A factory leaves the U.S. Paying workers $25 an hour or something, and they go to Mexico and pay workers $3 a day. So the Mexican worker says to himself, why should I work for an American corporation for $3 a day when I can at least get minimum wage if I go to America?
Right.
Hello.
Right. And in that, I was working with a family from Salinas where they were picking the artichokes. You ever tried picking artichokes? Well, look at your fingers afterwards. They're bleeding and the things that are happening to the women. But right here in San Francisco, I'm really urging us to look for some alternatives, because I think we have an opportunity with some of the Board of Soups somewhere where we can take some of these buildings. Some of these buildings need to be what do you call it? They need to be designated.
Rehabbed.
You know, for women and children and disabled and the elderly. And we can do this. You know, take it. Everywhere I look, this is an island, believe it or not. You know, I know there's a little strip that connects us, but everywhere I look, there's sand. And in them, when these buildings go up, 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 and we don't have one for women and children and the disabled and the elderly, we need to rethink ourselves, because that may be us tomorrow, you know.
Well, the housing crisis is in crisis. I mean,
right.
It's a terrible crisis all over the country. And we've got an idiot that's heading up HUD who knows nothing about housing.
Yeah.
And, you know,
which is purposeful. Of
course. And we've got these fascists in the White House who have decided to give to expand the military budget exponentially and drastically cut all the safety net out from under ordinary everyday people like us, because they're gonna trash all the programs. They're gonna cut Medicare, Medi-Cal.
Mm-hmm.
They're gonna
health care and all of it. So what we try to do is Families for the
They're
Future.
getting ready to cut it.
Yeah, I know, and that's why Families for the Future. And I am asking. I don't write grants. I'm not asking the government to give me permission to do anything. So I am asking for donations for 1540 Market Street. One of the things that we have been doing is that with the donations that come, for example, I have this woman, she's in a domestic violence class. She gets to see her children actually, and she's from Monterey County, but she's in a program here, which I will leave unnamed, and the program doesn't supply the transportation, plus she has to pay $100 an hour for a visit with her child. So when I first started, yeah, $100 an hour. That's what they're charging her in these counties for a parent-child visit that has to be supervised. Can you believe that? So we started off in 1997 because there was no buses or BARTs that went to the Dublin prison and other places. So the way things that have transitioned is helping phone calls, and also the transportation for women who are incarcerated, who get out of incarceration, to be able to pay their fare to go to different places so they can see their children, because that's the biggest separation that's happening now, is under the judicial system. And also a lot of women and transgenders and cis, you know, because I know that's a very, very vulnerable population, and that we have to really protect those most vulnerable. And I include, when I say women, I'm saying LGBTQI, all of it, because we are very vulnerable if we don't stick together and work towards some type of unity. But what happens frequently is that they not only get displaced from their biological family, but also those that they don't have a recognized partnership with. That's still your family. Right. That is still your family. Sometimes your best family is those that you're not biologically connected to.
Absolutely.
So in that, when we talk about families, we have to extend what is family and the meaning of family. And it's who's sacred to me, who supports me. Because like I said, no matter
really
what
loves me.
Yeah, and the whole historical thing is everybody has this historical trauma that they're identity people have gone through, and in that, support has been crucial. Support has been crucial with the network of having others to help each other. So we have to help each other in very creative ways.
We sure do. And you know, there was an article that I actually in the New York Times today that talked about the drastic cuts they just eliminated the free busing program to New York prisons, and New York prisons, of course, are way out of way upstate and far away from the cities where most of the prisoners come from, New York City and Philadelphia and stuff.
And the inclement weather that don't forget the weather. You know, it
the
snows there.
Yeah,
Okay,
yes,
maybe
yes.
snowing here tomorrow.
So
and
the
climate
prisoners are
change, but-
in real trouble there to be able to see their relatives and their children and stuff. So they're making it harder and harder. And this separation of families, I think, is very deliberate.
Oh,
I think
yeah.
they're dividing us, and they're trying to make sure that we don't multiply, that we're not fruitful and reproductive. You know, because they're taking away the years, the youth of our young men. I mean, and
especially
women
during those
too.
years,
And,
especially during the years, you know,
during
during those most
reproductive
important
years,
years,
yes.
which is another travesty. I remember someone I was incarcerated with, she said, well, it's not just being incarcerated, it's just the fact that they've taken away the years that if I decide to, the option is gone where I cannot have any children. And not to mention how many reproductive sterilizations that have happened right here in the state of California through the prison system.
Oh, I'm sure.
Yeah, you
And
know.
I remember we fought those issues years ago. They were
We fought them back in the
sterilizing
60s and
people.
70s,
Hell,
and
yeah.
they're back.
Yeah. Oh God. Everything.
Okay.
Oh, they're trying to turn the clock back as fast as they can.
Yeah,
And
yeah.
it's.
But we're not going to let them.
No, we're not.
We're not going to let them, you know.
No,
you know,
no.
la lucha continúa. You know, the struggle will continue.
Yes.
You know,
Yes.
in whatever creative way it can
Yeah.
be, we're going to
Because
continue
freedom
to
is a
fight.
constant struggle.
That's right. Freedom is a constant
Yes, it
struggle.
is. It's a protracted struggle as well.
Exactly.
You know, when we were young, we thought it's going to be all over, and then we're going to make revolution,
Yeah.
and we're going to take power, and before you know it, everything will be fine.
Yeah,
But
that's
no,
what we thought. I thought, anyway, I definitely
yeah,
thought that. I said,
but,
in 4 or 5 years it's going to change because we had the Vietnam War going, you know, Attica happened and San Quentin, so much was going on. I said, well, it can't go like this forever, you know, but guess what?
It can even get worse.
Yes, especially if you're not vigilant. We have to continue to be
Yes.
aware and vigilant of what's happening with our neighbors, knocking on doors, seeing how we can help children of incarcerated families who have lost their mother or father or both, you know, or extended family, you know, whether it's a same-sex family or what. People who do not have other people to help make it to the next decade in their life. That's who we have to help. And we have to be creative about what we're looking at when we call what is extended family, and how we can actually be that mentor that's not going to harm them. Another thing that happened a couple of weeks ago, I'm going to say this really quick. There was this young woman who was 13 years old, and she was being inappropriately touched, and in that, I said, okay, I know I'll get in all kind of trouble if I take her home and just let her live there the rest of her life. So of course I called 311. Right here we have. They said take her to one of the agencies, and when the agencies you get there, it's extremely sterile. So she just bust out and started crying, because the cultural shock of coming from a vibrant community and going to a sterile environment was just too much, and she wound up walking away. So I don't know where this 13-year-old is now, because she just walked away. We can't protect our children.
No, how can you protect children when we have about 300 children homeless right here in San Francisco?
Exactly, she's one of them, I'm sure. Because a social worker called me the other day and said, oh, she's a walkaway. Oh yeah, I wonder why. Something is missing here.
And I think that's an underestimation.
Oh yeah, it is. Anytime they count, it's an undercount.
Mm-hmm. Oh,
you know, they say
it.
they have 7,000 homeless here. Wrong. You know, it's a lot more,
No,
because
it's
you know
not.
the houseless people travel. You know, because they have to,
Yeah, and
because they're constantly taking their things.
Yeah, they're constantly moving, and nobody who's sleeping on somebody's couch is going to fess up that I'm homeless. People are ashamed of being homeless, and but you know, there are people now who I heard a story just recently. An engineer, somebody interviewed a guy who had just been homeless a couple of days or something, and he was an engineer who lost his job and couldn't pay his rent. Well, who can pay $3,000 average rent in San Francisco if they lose their job? So there are more and more middle-class working people falling into homelessness.
So it's
crazy.
It's really crazy. But I know that families with the future, we're just a little grain of sand in the sea. But in that grain of sand in the sea of all that, it's really important that we're able to continue giving some help
Absolutely.
to the few
and
that we are able to.
Share the website and phone numbers.
Familieswiththefuture.org, 415 999-8084. But also 1540 Market Street, Suite 490, San Francisco, California, 94103. Families with the Future, 1540 Market Street, Suite 490, San Francisco, 94103. And I just want to give a shout out to all those who are locked behind these walls, locked in their homes, locked in poverty, and locked in situations where they can't immediately see a way out. But I'm telling you, get out and organize. That's what we have to do.
Right, and we have to start caring much more about one another and stop being afraid of each other, for goodness sakes. You know?
Yeah, get off of social media. Except this one. This is not social media.
Yeah, stop walking around like this all day.
Oh, I know.
It's
Isn't that
awful.
something? I see so
awful.
many people crossing the street. Here comes a Mack truck, but you know, you're so important you couldn't wait to get across the street. I remember eons ago, I used to have to go home and wait for that phone call. Remember those days?
Oh, yeah.
All right, you know, I mean, everything needs to be held in balance. That's what I'm saying. You know, social media is okay, but you know, stop putting your business on.
It's addictive, and people are becoming
right, and they're putting their business out. You know, which there's no police work.
People are becoming addicts.
I broke up today. Really? Oh wow.
I know. Yeah.
So support us and support organizations that are really finding it difficult to be in the San Francisco area. You know, support your neighbors, your families, and the children. And also, I think it's extremely important that we come away from the social media and join hands with other people who have never been activists before are getting out in the streets.
Good.
You know, and we need to, you know, come to New La Lucha. We need to continue the struggle in what way that we can.
Yeah, absolutely. And I just wanted to suggest to our viewers that if any of you enterprising young people want to do something very beneficial to prisoners and their children, why don't you try to organize a free bus program?
Oh, that would be so good.
The Panthers did it a long time ago. I'm sure a group of people could get together and come up with a bus, you know.
Bus, van, you know, I've been renting, you know, it takes money to rent these big vans. I've taken a whole, these 9 passenger vans, you know, you're in them, you're an enterprise, you got to have a card, credit card, okay, finally I got one, okay, and you have to bring it back within a certain amount of time. It's about a $500 or $600 endeavor. You know, just for a weekend, because most of the places are closed. You can't turn it in on Sunday, you know, and they've eliminated a lot of visitations in the prisons. You should be able to go through the week. So on the weekend, it's
now they've restricted it to weekends only?
Yeah, it's a hardship, you know. And then not to mention that, we still have women who are you know, who are being vulnerable and committing a lot of suicides. There are a lot of suicides that are happening.
I've been hearing about them.
Yeah, I mean, they're happening out here, and they're happening within the prison walls. And some I question if they're suicides, but you know, of course, I'm not doing the investigation. But from what I'm hearing from the women, thank you, CCWP, California Coalition of Women Prisoners, is that some of them are very, very questionable. When women are losing their lives behind the walls. So we need to question what's happening behind there to know. We also should ask the media what happened to interviewing prisoners, because when the public has their eye on what's happening and think this because they're locked up, you know, these are human beings inside, and especially what's happening a lot with the transgenders in the carceral system is atrocious.
Right.
So be vigilant, people.
Okay. And I'm wondering if Julian Kunnie is watching and thinking he doesn't want to interrupt. Julian, if you're watching, call and we'll stop. I don't want to stop talking and you know, and have a blank studio here. So call in, Julian, if you hear my voice. So because we are expecting a call from Julian to talk about Juneteenth.
Juneteenth in San Francisco.
I mean, not Juneteenth, June 16th. I'll start talking about it a little bit. June 16th was And I remember it because I was reading about it a lot, and I think I was in the hospital system at the time, and I was devouring news. Um, and the young students, I mean, really young students, um, uh, fought, there he is, protested against apartheid's institution of the Afrikaans language. Julian? Julian?
Greetings, Kilo.
Greetings, Julian.
Hi.
How you
Say
doing,
hi to Ida.
Ida?
Hi.
Yeah, and we're gonna put your picture up, an image up on the screen in a minute, and we're gonna go ahead. And Ida, thank you so much for
Thank
being
you.
my guest. I'm gonna let you go because I know you have an engagement, and thank you so much.
Thank you.
Take care. And Julian, I was just starting to talk about Soweto. When the children, I remember that they carried the dustbins as shields when they went up against
Yes,
the police.
I'm
Will you
here.
elaborate on that?
How you doing? How you doing, Ida?
There's feedback. Do you have your radio up? Turn your radio off, your TV off.
Yes, I'm going to turn that off right now.
Okay, good.
There we go.
Okay, we're ready. So go ahead.
I'm sorry, I didn't get the. Firstly, thank you so much for inviting me to be on this very, very important program.
Well,
And it's wonderful to have my sister Kilo there. After all of these decades, still out in the trenches, fighting the good fight.
Well, it's wonderful to have you. I had hoped to have you by Skype so people could see you, but we weren't able to work that out on short notice. So, Julian, talk about June 16th, 1976.
Right. Now, June 16th, 1976 is a very, very important event in African struggle, particularly, of course, the Azanian or South African struggle for liberation and the Pan-African struggle for liberation. Because I think it's so important for us to always connect with the Pan-African liberation movement and not become, colonial victims and begin to build our identities based on colonial national configurations. So June 16th, 1976 was a historic landmark in the evolution of the Azanian liberation struggle and the African liberation struggle, because you had, for the first time in quite a few generations, the young people taking on the cudgels of struggle and putting themselves on the line and literally sacrificing their lives so that the country could move out of this apartheid colonialist tyranny. And even though, a number of people talk about, the imposition of Afrikaans, which is a bastardized version of Dutch from the Dutch colonial period, the struggle was really about breaking free from the yoke of white minority rule and white supremacy. And the tragedy is that so many of our people today have forgotten, and especially from the ruling African National Congress. If it wasn't for the sacrifices of over 1,000 youth and several other thousand who sacrificed being with their families, were forced into exile, eventually joined groups like the Black Consciousness Movement, Mkhonto Sizwe, Pokno, the Pan-African Liberation Movement and the armed wing of these organizations of the Pan-Africanist Congress, and the African National Congress. If it wasn't for the sacrifices of these young women and men, and it's important to emphasize that women were really also at the center of this whole thing in terms of the resistance, contrary to all of the stereotypical male imposed, pictures of the struggle, of the African liberation struggle. And so it was the sacrifices of those young people. In fact, when you look at the history, especially in the 80s, when Mkhonto we Sizwe was engaged in a number of activities.
Mkhonto we Sizwe being the spear of the nation?
The spear of the nation, the armed wing of the African National Congress. It wasn't the senior fighters that were sent out, as part of these missions of guerrilla warfare. It was these young people.
Right.
It was these young people all the time. They were sacrificed. And yet the irony is today is that young people are being sacrificed by a globalized capitalist state, the South African government. And so, this is the tragedy. This is the manner that colonialism has never been able, we've never been able to extinguish the very tenacious legacy of European colonialism and the capitalist system in Africa. And so the tragedy is that, it's become very sanitized. It was called Soweto. When we talk about, people talk about the Soweto insurrection. The South African state went ahead and sanitized that and made it Youth Day.
Yeah, I read that. I couldn't believe it. I said, "Oh my goodness."
Yeah, and this is the kind of absurdity we have. Total unrecognition of the sacrifices of the young women and men, the youth, who gave all of their supreme sacrifice of their lives and their families, so that Azania could be, in a different place. So whatever dispensation,
Azania meaning the African name for South Africa.
Right. Whatever dispensation we have today in a so-called post-apartheid democratic society, it's the Black Consciousness Movement, it's the Soweto Students Representative Council, and many of these Black consciousness formations, the radical fringe of the Black liberation movement that propelled South Africa into the situation that it has today, when we had Nelson Mandela as the first Black president and so on. But how do people forget? How do people forget history? Except that colonialism, capitalism, as an entrenched system of genocide, slavery, and domination, reinforces the forgetfulness and the amnesia.
Yep. With its mass media.
Mass media.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, we need to celebrate the accomplishments of South Africa experiencing the first major nonviolent revolution. See, that's how it's talked about. And we've built the first non-racial democracy. Well, you and I know very well, based on the struggles of Abashlali Basem Jondolo, that's not true.
And translate that. Abashlali Basem Jondolo is the shack dwellers movement.
Yes. Yes, and what a disgrace in 2017, in June 2017, to have people being killed by the eThekwini security forces because they wanted to occupy land because they're homeless and landless.
Right. Yes, I've been in touch by email with Abashlali.
Yes.
I get their posts, and the ANC has actually had their goons kill some of the protesters,
Yes.
murder
Yes.
them. and
Yes.
they're living in shacks with no electricity, no running water.
Oh, it is just, it's an abomination.
Yes, it
It's
is.
an abomination that we have such a facade. You know, a lot of people want to go to South Africa, especially a lot of black people
Uh-huh.
from here
Right?
to see the new non-racial democracy at work. And we always tell them, look, the system is still the same. Just because you have a black face, like we have here, just because
Like
you have
we
a black
had.
mayor, you know, of a major city in Detroit or Atlanta or San Francisco, by no means implies that black people in those communities, in those cities, in those environments have economic, equitable economic access or political power or social influence. Not at all. So the facade needs to be exposed, and this is, you know, this is what our struggle is all about in 2017. And we've just got to pull the wool off the eyes of all of our people, whoever they are, to make them understand, look, we're still resisting colonization. This globalized world continues to deprive indigenous people in Africa, in this country, African descended people in this hemisphere, the people of color, you know, in this continent, and of the basic right to water. I mean, you had people being, you know, arrested for trying to break a water pipe to get water because they couldn't afford the water bill. Right around there in the southeastern part of South Africa. You know, you have this irony. So meanwhile, you have like, you know, 4 or 5 individuals, I think it's 5 now, who own more than half of the country's people. You know?
Well, that a similar phenomenon exists globally. I mean, you have
Yes,
about
yes.
it
5
was
people,
just
the 5 billionaires. You know, Gates and Zuckerberg and all these guys, the 5 now who own more than 3.5 billion people. You know,
exactly half the world's population
Yes,
combined.
yes.
It's unbelievable. The disparities in wealth are just mind-boggling.
Oh, it's just
Yeah, so
and
it's basically let them die. They don't care
yes.
about poor people anymore. They'd rather we die, and they're killing us as fast as they
Oh,
can.
look, I mean, this is why, I talk about genocide when I write my articles, and there's how tragic it is that my black academic colleagues find that term extreme. They find that term extreme.
I'm sorry. Could you repeat that?
When I use the term genocide.
Uh-huh.
Genocide, according to the Geneva Convention, is an attempt to erase a group, you know, through linguicide, ethnocide, removing children from the group, basically depriving people of the right to their own indigenous cultural resources.
Well,
And that includes issues of land, a home, security. Now, when you look at black experience across Africa and across this continent,
I was about to say right here.
right here,
Mm-hmm.
you know, the manner in which the prison system, you know, I have a project in prisons where I go and talk to especially black men of color, and men in general, to document their stories of, I mean, you have brothers there in prison who have received a 150-year sentence.
I know.
You know,
Unbelievable.
I mean, it's criminal.
Yes.
It's criminal. It's absolutely criminal, because the system would like to do away with black people
Yes, they would.
because of all this technology. They don't need black labor anymore. Not
No,
like
they
during
don't.
slavery.
Well, they've got black labor behind the walls at anywhere from $0 to $3 an hour.
Oh yeah, slavery.
Slave labor.
Legalized system.
Absolutely. In
So the
fact, there are
whole
more
world-
prisoners today than there were slaves.
Yeah, The whole world is one big slave ship.
Exactly, and
You know?
getting worse. And what is it but slavery when you've got the president's daughter having shoes made in Bangladesh, where workers are paid like a pittance, and in these sweatshops where they're worked enormous hours, like 60, 70 hours a week and stuff for nothing almost. It's so nasty what they're doing now to workers all over the world.
It's horrific. I mean, we've got to realize what's happening. I've been in China many times, and in fact, I'm going to be doing some teaching in July. And I have seen the conditions under which the majority of Chinese workers live, like 21st century slaves.
Right.
Malcolm talking about 20th century slaves. And here we are, 21st century slaves. They have to leave their families, most of them, travel 2,000 miles to go and work in Beijing or Shanghai or Guangzhou or whatever. They see their families maybe once a year.
Right.
The women.
And they live in hostels like the South Africans used to live.
This is exactly it. Mm-hmm. And that's how most of our cheap products in the United States are made.
Mm-hmm.
Through slave labor.
Exactly.
Slavery has never been abolished.
No. And Julian, I remember when Julian Kunnie, I remember when about maybe over 20 years ago, as a matter of fact, I was visiting Ida and I was telling them that about the labor costs and how China was paying workers 80 times less. No, wait a minute. Let me get this right. They could hire 80 workers for every one worker, American worker, because they were paying them 10 cents an hour.
Yes.
And so I remember that one company or something. I remember the Chinese workers wanted a raise, and so they said, "Well, screw China," and they've moved to Bangladesh and Vietnam, where the labor was even cheaper.
Yes. Yes.
Yeah, and I'll never forget that fire several years ago in Bangladesh that killed about 1,100 workers, and they found all these labels in the ashes from American corporations, and I would name them, but I don't want to advertise them.
No. It's a process of genocide,
Yes.
A rapid killing of all of these poor people, let alone being exposed to all of the chemicals, in the industrialized companies in China, in Africa, in this country, in Latin America, and so on, where workers are forced to work in these plants. If you complain, you're fired. You may get killed if you even begin to talk about your rights. That's why those Chinese workers working for Foxconn, that makes all of these Apple products.
Right.
I feel ashamed of, having a Mac computer because they instead of protesting, instead of asking for a raise, they attempted suicide, about 21 of them. And about 6 or 7 were successful.
Oh.
This is the reality. And this is a company, Apple, is worth $500 billion. I think it's number 2. It may even still be number 1.
I think it's number 1 now.
Yeah, $500 billion worth in terms of capitalization. And you have slave labor,
Yeah, I know. I've stopped shopping in so many of these stores and stuff, and I'm sitting here with an Apple computer. That you hate to do it. You hate to be complicit.
Well, they got us slaves. We enslaved to this whole neo-colonial, globalized, capitalist, genocidal system.
Yes.
And I say these things not nonchalantly. I'm saying this because tangibly on the ground, we have experienced the conditions in Africa and around the world where people don't have the basic rights of water, clean drinking water.
Oh, they don't have that right in Flint, right here, and Detroit.
Yeah, and so they lie to us and say technology is the answer. You know, where's the technology going to provide water, clean drinking water for people, for children, for women especially? And now that's why you got people suffering from all kinds of diseases and infection, respiratory problems, and cancer and everything else, you know, besides
Exactly.
the poisoned food.
Lead poisoning.
Lead poisoning, yeah. But, you know, these guys talk about bringing civilization to the, quote, natives. That's what they've been talking about. Globalization, as I said, is a recolonization of the world. You know, it's a recolonization of the entire world. And it's using the same colonial ideology,
Right.
unashamedly.
Right. Yeah. And the U.S. is the empire, you know.
Oh, this is the empire. This is where, you know, I mean, that's why they're killing so many people there in Syria, and Libya, and Somalia, Afghanistan, Yemen. You know, I can barely read the news. Iraq.
I know. Hundreds and
they wanna
hundreds
kill
of
as many
civilians
people as
every
possible.
day.
They want to kill as many people as possible.
Yeah. And what they're doing in Yemen I don't have an adjective. It's
It's
disgraceful.
diabolical. It's just totally
horrific.
diabolical. You know, those poor Houthi people resisting oppression. And here they are talking about, you know, Muslims being bad and terrorists. The first terrorist is a Saudi Arabian Wahhabi monarchy.
Right.
That's
I
been
know
killing
this.
those people.
Yeah,
They've
and
been
of
bombing
course,
poor
the U.S.
Houthi.
best friend is Saudi Arabia, which is a monster government. Julian Kunnie, we're almost out of time, so I want to give you a chance to pump your book and give it and tell people where they can find you.
Well, the book is entitled "The Cost of Globalization: Dangers to the Earth and Its People." The book is really a voice of the earth.
Okay, well that's. Oh, we got a few more.
Yeah. It
Go.
focuses heavily on indigenous people, on ecocide, on wars against the earth.
Okay, that's it. Thank you, Julian. Thank you, Jackie Perez. Thank you, viewers, for tuning in to Freedom is a Constant Struggle. I'm your Kilu Nyasha.
Ashe, ashe.